Everyone who followed Hollywood in the 1950s knows Kirk Douglas stories. But there's one story nobody talks about. Ace in the Hole, Billy Wilder's brutal film about an immoral journalist. Kirk Douglas internalized the role so deeply that even when the cameras stopped rolling, he couldn't step out of character. Set workers started feeling uncomfortable. One lighting technician was so affected by Kirk's gaze and tone that he practically fled the studio. He was in tears. Billy Wilder said he'd never witnessed anything like it in his life. The footage shot that day never made it into the archives. Too real, he said. Today we call it method acting. Back then, it had a simpler name, dangerous. Before we continue, if you appreciate deep dives into Hollywood's untold stories, consider subscribing. Pre-production started in early 1951. Kirk Douglas did something unusual. He started preparing for the role weeks before shooting began, but not in the way actors typically prepared. He didn't just read the script. He started becoming Chuck Tatum in his daily life. According to whispers around the Paramount lot, Kirk would arrive at meetings with that same aggressive confidence his character displayed. He'd interrupt people, dominate conversations, speak over executives. Some thought he was just being difficult. Others recognized what was happening. He was building the character from the inside out. His wife at the time noticed changes at home. Kirk would practice Tatum's cynical laugh. He'd rehearse lines with a cigarette dangling from his lips, even though he wasn't a heavy smoker. He studied newspaper reporters, particularly the aggressive tabloid journalists who'd do anything for a headline. He watched how they moved, how they looked at people as potential stories rather than human beings. Billy Wilder watched this transformation with fascination and growing concern. He'd worked with intense actors before, but Kirk was operating on a different level. During table reads, Kirk wouldn't just deliver lines. He'd turn them into weapons, using tone and timing to dominate every scene, even when the scene wasn't about dominance. Shooting began in late February 1951. The production moved to Gallup, New Mexico, where they built an elaborate cave set for the film's central location. The heat was oppressive. The conditions were difficult. And Kirk Douglas was becoming someone else entirely. The first week of shooting set the tone. In one early scene, Chuck Tatum walks into a small-town newspaper office and demands a job. Kirk delivered the lines with such aggressive charisma that the actors playing the newspaper staff genuinely seemed intimidated. They weren't all acting. Billy Wilder, known for his precise direction and sharp wit, found himself in an unusual position. Kirk was giving him exactly what he wanted, but the intensity was bleeding beyond the frame. Between takes, Kirk wouldn't fully drop the character. He'd stay in Tatum's headspace, keeping that edge, that predatory quality. Set workers started noticing. The grips, the camera operators, the lighting crew, they all felt it. When Kirk Douglas walked on a set as Chuck Tatum, the atmosphere changed. People became quieter, more cautious. It wasn't fear exactly, but it was close. The story that circulated through Hollywood for years afterward involved a particular day of shooting. The details varied depending on who's telling it, but the core remains consistent across multiple accounts shared decades later. They were shooting one of the cave sequences. Chuck Tatum manipulates everyone around him. The trapped man's wife, the local sheriff, even the contractors trying to rescue the victim. It's a sequence that shows Tatum at his most ruthless, turning human tragedy into a carnival. Kirk Douglas was deep in character. The cameras rolled. He delivered his lines with that characteristic intensity, that mixture of charm and menace that made Chuck Tatum so compelling and so disturbing. The scene required multiple takes because of technical issues with the cave set lighting. Here's where the accounts get interesting. According to set gossip that spread through the industry, during one of the breaks between takes, Kirk didn't drop character. He remained in Tatum's mindset, staying sharp and aggressive. A lighting technician needed to adjust something on set, which required briefly interrupting Kirk's preparation for the next take. What happened next became the subject of intense speculation. The interaction between Kirk and the crew member apparently became tense. Kirk, still embodying Chuck Tatum's ruthless personality, reportedly responded with the same cold, dominating energy his character displayed. Not shouting, not physically threatening, but with such psychological intensity that the crew member was visibly shaken. The lighting technician left the set. Some accounts say he was overwhelmed. Others suggest he simply needed a break from the oppressive atmosphere Kirk's method had created. When Billy Wilder heard about it, he reportedly called a brief production halt. Billy Wilder faced an interesting problem. He was getting a performance unlike anything he'd seen before. Kirk Douglas wasn't just playing Chuck Tatum. He was channeling something genuinely dark and uncomfortable. The footage was extraordinary, raw, disturbing, exactly what the film needed. But Wilder was also responsible for his crew's well-being. The set had become psychologically intense in ways that went beyond normal filmmaking pressures. Kirk's commitment to the role was creating an environment that mirrored the film's themes a little too closely. According to industry insiders who heard the story years later, Wilder sat down with Kirk Douglas. The conversation was private, but those who heard about it secondhand said Wilder made a request: maintain the intensity on camera, but create some separation between takes. The performance was perfect, but the method needed boundaries. Kirk reportedly understood, but he also made it clear that he couldn't simply turn Chuck Tatum on and off like a light switch. The character had to live in him throughout the shooting day. It was the only way he knew how to work. They found a compromise. Kirk would take longer breaks between scenes. He'd physically leave the set, walk around, smoke a cigarette, and create some mental distance before returning to Tatum's headspace. It helped, but the intensity never fully dissipated. The rest of production continued with that underlying tension. Kirk Douglas delivered a career-defining performance. Chuck Tatum is one of cinema's great antiheroes, charismatic, intelligent, and utterly lacking in empathy. Kirk made him real. He made audiences understand how someone like Tatum could exist, how ambition could corrode morality so completely. But the cost was real. Several crew members who worked on Ace in the Hole later said it was one of the most challenging shoots of their careers, not because of physical demands, but because of the psychological atmosphere Kirk's method created. They respected the performance, but were relieved when production wrapped. Kirk himself seemed changed by the experience. In interviews years later, he described Ace in the Hole as one of his most important films, but would rarely discuss the actual production. When asked about his approach to Chuck Tatum, he'd deflect or give brief answers. It was as if channeling that level of darkness had left marks he didn't want to examine too closely. Billy Wilder had his own complicated relationship with the film. He considered it one of his best works and one of his biggest commercial failures. Audiences in 1951 weren't ready for such an uncompromising portrait of American cynicism. The film bombed at the box office. Paramount even changed the title to The Big Carnival, hoping to attract more viewers. Nothing worked. Here's where the story gets murky. Over the years, rumors persisted about footage that was shot but never used. Some claimed Billy Wilder had scenes that were too intense, too real, too disturbing even for a film as dark as Ace in the Hole. Others dismissed these claims as typical Hollywood mythology, the kind of stories that grow around difficult productions. What's verifiable is this. The final cut of Ace in the Hole is 111 minutes long. For a Billy Wilder film, that's relatively short. Wilder was known for tight editing, but he also typically shot more footage than made it into the final cut. Where that additional footage ended up, if it exists at all, remains unclear. Film historians have searched Paramount's archives. Some material has surfaced over the years, mostly alternate takes and deleted scenes that were cut for pacing rather than content. But the specific footage that supposedly captured Kirk Douglas at his most unsettling, if it exists, it's never been publicly shown. The persistent rumor is that Wilder himself removed certain material from consideration, not because it was badly acted or technically flawed, but because it was too successful. It showed Chuck Tatum's darkness so completely, so uncomfortably, that crossed the line from drama into something that felt more like witnessing actual psychological manipulation. Was this true? We may never know for certain. But the story persisted in Hollywood circles for decades, told and retold, always with slight variations, but always with the same core. Kirk Douglas went somewhere dark for Ace in the Hole, and even Billy Wilder found it unsettling. But the stories about the production remained. They became part of Hollywood lore, told in various forms, always with that same core. Kirk Douglas scared Billy Wilder. Kirk Douglas created something so intense that even the director who wanted it found it almost too much. Whether the specific incidents happened exactly as described in the rumors, or whether they've been embellished over 70 years of retelling, almost doesn't matter. What matters is that they represent something true about Kirk Douglas's approach to acting and the effect it had on people around him. Ace in the Hole captures that version of Kirk perfectly. Chuck Tatum is Kirk's ambition, his intensity, his willingness to dominate any room or situation, channeled into a character. It's Kirk Douglas without the charm he developed to make his intensity palatable. Watching the film today, you can see why it made people uncomfortable. Kirk doesn't wink at the audience. He doesn't give us permission to like Chuck Tatum. He simply presents the character in all his ambitious, manipulative glory and forces us to reckon with it. That's great acting. It's also, according to the whispers that still circulate in Hollywood, something that scared one of cinema's greatest directors. In the end, Ace in the Hole stands as a testament to what happens when an actor's commitment meets a director's vision without compromise. Billy Wilder wanted to make a film about American cynicism and media manipulation. Kirk Douglas gave him a performance that embodied those themes so completely that it became uncomfortable even for the people creating it. Was it worth it? The film failed commercially, but eventually gained recognition as a masterpiece. Kirk Douglas's career continued successfully for decades. Billy Wilder went on to make more commercially successful films. Everyone survived the experience. But something happened on that set in 1951. Something that people who were there remembered for the rest of their lives. Something that turned into stories, legends, and persistent rumors about footage too intense to show. Maybe those stories are true. Maybe they're exaggerated. Maybe they're a mixture of both. Real events filtered through decades of retelling until they become something between fact and mythology. What we can say for certain is this. Kirk Douglas created something powerful and unsettling in Ace in the Hole. He showed us what complete commitment to a role looks like, what it costs, and what it can achieve. And according to the stories that still circulate in Hollywood, stories that may be gossip, maybe legend, maybe truth, he created something that even Billy Wilder found difficult to watch. That's the real story of Ace in the Hole. Not just a great performance, but a performance so intense it became legendary for reasons that go beyond what appears on screen. Kirk Douglas didn't just play Chuck Tatum. For a few weeks in 1951, in the New Mexico heat and on those elaborate cave sets, he became him, and everyone around him felt it.